Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to Sci-Fi Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely no budget to keep operating. If you find today's story thrilling, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hard-working team to survive and continue creating these universes for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description or pinned comment. They told us the human mind was nothing more than a fragile algorithm. They calculated that we would shatter in exactly 4.2 hours. They thought our survival instinct would turn us into terrified animals, tearing each other apart in the pitch-black cold. They said humans would collapse in hours. We ended the battle in minutes. The sky did not fall. It shattered. It happened at exactly 12 noon in the Western Hemisphere. First, there was a deafening sound, a low-frequency rumble that vibrated through the marrow of every living thing on Earth. Then, the vast blue expanse above fractured into perfect, terrifying hexagons. It looked as though a gigantic sheet of glass had been thrown over the entire world and struck with a celestial hammer. Within minutes, the cracks turned into solid, light-absorbing steel. The Aegis construct had arrived. It was a mechanical superstructure of incomprehensible scale, wrapping itself around our planet, sealing all of humanity inside a metallic tomb. The sun vanished entirely. The temperature plummeted in seconds, casting the world into an unnatural, freezing twilight. Deep underground, beneath the impenetrable bedrock of the Rocky Mountains, Dustin Brownlee stood in the dim light of the Global Command Center. He was a former orbital tactical engineer, a man who had spent his life preparing for wars that never happened. Now, serving as the lead director of the Zeus Protocol. The Zeus system was humanity's desperate, sprawling network designed to regulate our dying climate and stabilize the planetary magnetic field. Now, those massive monitors showed something far worse than ecological collapse. They displayed the absolute nullification of human military might. On the towering screens, Dustin watched telemetry data blink red in a cascading wave of failure. Every anti-aircraft battery, every orbital defense laser, every nuclear silo from the United States to allied nations went completely offline. The defense systems were suffocated, locked down by an unseen force before a single human finger could pull a trigger. Then came the voice. There were no hijacked television signals, no alien vessels broadcasting demands from loudspeakers hovering over capital cities. The alien race, calling themselves the Vel, bypassed human technology entirely. Instead, they forced their transmission directly into the cerebral cortex of all 8 billion people on Earth simultaneously. Dustin dropped to his knees, clutching his skull as an agonizing, blinding pain spiked right behind his eyes. It felt as if a freezing iron spike was being driven slowly through his frontal lobe. "We are the Vel," the voice echoed. It was perfectly modulated, crystalline, and completely devoid of anything resembling empathy. It was the Supreme Architect. "Do not attempt to resist. We have initiated the harvest of your planetary magnetic core. Your world is rich in the heavy metals and kinetic energies our empire requires." Dustin groaned, tasting hot blood in his mouth where he had bitten his own lip. Around him, the finest technicians, seasoned generals, and brilliant military minds in the bunker were writhing on the concrete floor, paralyzed by the sheer psychic weight of the transmission. The Supreme Architect continued, its tone echoing with the chilling pride of a cold mathematician solving a basic equation. "Our quantum engines have calculated your demise. With the sudden loss of solar radiation and the resulting atmospheric pressure shifts, your fragile herd mentality will fracture. Our algorithms dictate that your global society will collapse into terminal panic and self-destruction in exactly 4.2 hours. You will do the work of extermination for us." The voice resonated with unbearable, suffocating arrogance. We have assimilated 900 worlds across this galaxy. We have never lost a single soldier. We have never even deployed a single physical weapon against an indigenous population. Flesh and bone always obey the immutable laws of mathematical variables and predictable survival logic. You are simply raw data, and your data concludes today. The crushing pressure in their heads vanished as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a terrifying, heavy silence in the underground bunker. Emergency red lights bathed the room in a bloody, ominous glow. Dustin slowly pulled himself up, using the edge of his steel console for support. His breath came in ragged, painful gasps. He looked up at the main tactical display. The generals behind him were recovering, already screaming frantic orders, demanding immediate nuclear strikes, demanding that the orbital lasers be fired manually from analog backups. But Dustin knew it was entirely pointless. He stared at the shimmering readouts of the Aegis construct wrapping the globe. The Vel were not just blocking communications, they were projecting a probability shield. It was a technological marvel that could calculate the exact trajectory, velocity, mass, and payload of any conventional weapon before the projectile even left the barrel. If humanity fired a nuclear missile, the shield would shift its quantum density to that exact coordinate milliseconds beforehand. A high-powered laser would simply be refracted back to its source based on light speed predictions. Every gun, every bomb, every ounce of human firepower was rendered completely obsolete by pure mathematics. They were utterly helpless. The sky was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating machinery of a god-like enemy. The countdown had begun. They had exactly 4.2 hours until the math said they would tear themselves apart in the dark. The Supreme Architect expected a symphony of screams. It expected cities burning, populations trampling each other in the dark, and a rapid, mathematical descent into absolute savagery. Instead, the world offered them a terrifying, absolute silence. When the Aegis construct severed the global digital infrastructure, the internet died instantly. Satellite communications were crushed. Fiber optic networks turned into useless glass threads. But humanity is an old, paranoid species, and Dustin Brownlee had inherited the ultimate contingency. He slammed his fist onto a heavy, physical red switch encased in reinforced glass on his console. This was the dead man's switch. Instantly, the underground bunker's primary relays shut down, bypassing the digital era entirely. Deep beneath the earth, miles of forgotten thick copper cables surged to life. Analog radio towers, long considered relics of the 20th century, began broadcasting low-frequency, unhackable signals across the continents. "Get me Stratcom, the European Defense Council, and the Pacific Fleet," Dustin barked, his voice carrying the rough, undeniable edge of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Secure lines only. Morse code and analog voice bands. Let us see their quantum computers try to hack a copper wire." As the scratchy, static-filled confirmations rolled in from underground bunkers in Russia, China, and the United States, Dustin stared at the tactical maps. He understood the lethal flaw in the Vel's perfection. If an enemy can calculate every logical trajectory of a projectile fired into the sky, then firing upward is just an exercise in futility. Mathematics dictates the path of least resistance. Therefore, humanity had to become the most illogical variable in the universe. "They are tracking trajectory, velocity, and atmospheric friction," Dustin muttered, leaning over the war table. He looked up at the grizzled commanders surrounding him. "So, we are not going to shoot at them." A stunned silence fell over the room. General Vance, a scarred veteran of the Orbital Defense Corps, slammed his hand on the table. "Then, what the hell are we doing?" Brownlee, waiting to freeze. "We are going to shoot the Earth," Dustin replied, his eyes burning with a cold, frantic brilliance. "Execute the Tartarus Directive. Every nuclear submarine, every underground silo, Every deep-sea drilling rig, do not launch into the atmosphere. I want every available warhead injected directly into the planet's tectonic fault lines and dormant supervolcanoes. Yellowstone, the Mariana Trench, the San Andreas Fault, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Bury them as deep as the delivery systems can physically push. It was a plan of pure, unadulterated madness. To intentionally trigger global tectonic instability was a nightmare scenario. But the orders went out. Across the frozen, darkened globe, the remnants of human military might did not aim their silos at the metallic sky. Instead, heavy, boring machines, deep-sea submersibles, and modified bunker-buster missiles turned downward. They drove humanity's most destructive payloads deep into the highly pressurized, volatile crust of their own home. High above the stratosphere, the quantum sensors of the Aegis construct detected the massive redistribution of nuclear material. The Vels supercomputers processed trillions of variables per millisecond. The artificial intelligence analyzed the human action and cross-referenced it with their psychological algorithms. The conclusion was instantaneous and perfectly logical. The indigenous species had realized the futility of resistance and was orchestrating a synchronized, global mass suicide to avoid the prolonged agony of atmospheric freezing and magnetic extraction. The architect's systems calculated that this self-inflicted planetary destruction would accelerate the biological collapse. The timeline dropped sharply. The Vels computers concluded that the total pacification of Earth would occur in exactly 45 minutes, operating purely on efficiency. The automated systems of the Aegis construct prematurely lowered the probability shields in the lower stratosphere, conserving energy and extending their extraction tethers to begin draining the planet's magnetic core early. Down in the command bunker, the tactical screens showed the alien shields dropping. They had taken the bait. The atmosphere in the room shifted. There was no terror. There was no weeping for the end of the world. Instead, a grim, defiant camaraderie took hold. Well, if we are going to blow up our own house, I am glad I did not pay my mortgage this month, a young targeting officer said, wiping sweat from his brow, a dark grin spreading across his face. Chuckles rippled through the room. These were men and women about to input detonation codes that could crack the planet's crust in half. Yet their faces held nothing but arrogant, reckless pride. They were humanity's final middle finger to the cosmos. As General Vance turned his launch key, he looked over at Dustin, nodding with grim satisfaction. Dustin walked over to the primary analog broadcasting station. He picked up the heavy, old-fashioned microphone. He tuned the frequency to broadcast a raw, unencrypted radio wave directly into the void above, aiming right at the lowering mechanical tendrils of the Aegis construct. He pressed the transmission button. "Your math is only right when the opponent plays by the rules," Dustin said, his voice echoing through the static of the ancient radio. "But we do not." Exactly 11 minutes after the absolute ultimatum, Dustin Brownlee stood perfectly still amidst the screaming alarms. He looked at the analog countdown timer. He gave the final, irrevocable command. "Detonate." Deep within the crushing darkness of the Earth, hell broke loose. It was not a chaotic destruction. It was a violently precise geological surgery. Hundreds of nuclear warheads vaporized solid rock simultaneously. They did not breach the surface to create craters. The explosive yield was forced inward, directed violently toward the planetary center. The tremendous kinetic force slammed into the molten iron core of the world. The planet shuddered. The ground roared with a primal, deafening agony. Continents groaned. Massive fault lines shifted. Oceans boiled at their deepest vents, sending massive plumes of steam into the freezing air. But the crust held. The world did not shatter. Dustin had not built a doomsday weapon. He had built a global amplifier. The synchronized tectonic shockwave compressed the liquid iron core with unimaginable pressure. This violent compression triggered a massive, unnatural spike in the planet's magnetic field. The Earth itself became the weapon. It transformed into a gigantic, naturally occurring electromagnetic pulse generator. A column of pure, blinding geomagnetic energy erupted from the poles and the equator. It tore upward through the freezing atmosphere, shredding the dark clouds. It was a raw, howling force of nature. It was not a guided missile. It was not a focused laser beam. It possessed no digital targeting system. It had no predictable ballistic trajectory. The probability shield of the Aegis construct desperately tried to calculate the incoming threat. The quantum supercomputers parsed trillions of variables in a microsecond. They found absolutely nothing. There was no mathematical algorithm to deflect a planetary magnetic anomaly. The alien shield was designed to stop weapons of war, not the furious, untamed roar of a celestial body. The geomagnetic tsunami slammed into the lowering metallic tendrils of the Aegis structure. The impact was catastrophic. Sensory overload blinded the entire sky. A flash of violent blue and screaming violet light scorched the heavens, brighter than a dozen suns. The sheer electrical force surged through the alien superstructure. The lower half of the Aegis construct simply overloaded. Circuitry meant to last for eons melted in a fraction of a second. Thick, light-absorbing steel cracked, groaned, and splintered like cheap glass under immense tectonic pressure. Millions of unmanned alien drones lost power instantly. Their advanced anti-gravity drives died in the blink of an eye. The silent, terrifying armada of the Vel suddenly became nothing more than dead. Useless iron. They plummeted. The sky rained burning metal. Massive, geometric ships slammed into the oceans and the ruined landscapes. Shockwaves from their impacts leveled forests and shattered abandoned cities. It was a meteor shower of apocalyptic proportions. The invincible, untouchable armada was falling from the sky like broken toys. Far above the smoke and chaos, in the high-orbit command station, the unthinkable happened. The Supreme Architect registered a phenomenon it had not experienced in over 10 millennia of galactic conquest. A system error. Logic circuits failed to reconcile the incoming data. The indigenous species had weaponized their own planetary core. It defied all known parameters of biological self-preservation. It was completely, utterly illogical. Panic, simulated or otherwise, rippled through the quantum network. The architect immediately abandoned its elegant, bloodless harvest. It demanded brutal, physical subjugation. Deploy the reserve fleets. The architect broadcasted across its internal quantum network, its pristine voice now clipping with digital distortion. Crush them. Use physical force. Eradicate the anomalies. Thousands of massive, heavily armored dreadnoughts dove from the upper atmosphere. They ignited their brute force plasma thrusters, tearing through the broken, smoking pieces of the Aegis construct. They descended like heavily armed mechanical leviathans, ready to flatten the human resistance through sheer, overwhelming firepower. In the underground bunker, the red emergency lights flickered violently as the planetary shockwave finally settled. Dust fell from the concrete ceiling. Dustin watched the tactical monitors through the haze. The massive alien reserve fleets were descending rapidly, entering the lower atmosphere, bringing a firestorm with them. He wiped a streak of blood from his nose. A terrifying, predatory smile crept across his face. "They are in range," Dustin said, his voice deadly calm. "Flip the Zeus protocol." General Vance stared at him, bewildered, gripping the edge of the war table. "The climate shield." "It was never a shield," Dustin replied. He slammed his palm onto the main engagement console. Across the globe, the massive, dome-like structures of the Zeus protocol array roared to life. They did not project a protective atmospheric barrier. They reversed their polarity entirely. The massive planetary arrays acted as gigantic magnetic anchors. They fired thousands of thick, crackling cables of pure electromagnetic energy straight up into the smoke-filled sky. The blinding tethers lashed out like the tentacles of a colossal, enraged beast. They whipped through the freezing air and slammed into the descending alien dreadnoughts. The energy cables latched firmly onto the heavy metallic hulls of the Vel's reserve fleet. The alien ships roared, their plasma engines burning at maximum capacity to break free. It was useless. The magnetic anchors were tied directly to the immense, localized gravitational pull of the Earth's newly modified core. The mighty dreadnoughts of the Vel jolted to a violent, metal-rending halt. They were suspended in mid-air, trapped just miles above the surface. The majestic alien fleet was completely immobilized, chained to the Earth like captured prey in a spider's web. Dustin grabbed the heavy communications microphone. "The birds are in the cage," he announced to the waiting human forces. "Go get them." The roaring sky became an arena of suspended metal gods, chained to the Earth. From the blackened, smoking ruins of the surface below, humanity answered the call. They did not send sleek, highly advanced spacecraft to meet the invaders. They sent a ragged, screaming swarm of pure vengeance. Every remaining fighter jet, heavy bomber, and atmospheric transport launched simultaneously. Even retrofitted civilian cargo planes and commercial airliners, stripped of their seats and loaded with elite paratroopers, tore through the freezing clouds. The human armada was a chaotic, asymmetrical mess, but it was moving with a single, terrifying purpose. They did not bother firing long-range missiles. The alien point defense systems, even while tethered, would have swatted them away with mathematical precision. Instead, the human pilots pushed their throttles to maximum, burning engines past their safety limits, accelerating right into the teeth of the trapped dreadnoughts. As the jets and transports closed the gap to zero, they deployed their payload. Not explosives, harpoons, massive titanium-tipped grappling hooks, fired from heavy pneumatic cannons, slammed violently into the smooth, pristine armor of the alien vessels. Winches screamed as thick steel cables pulled the frail human aircraft flush against the massive hulls of the Vel dreadnoughts. Then, the boarding action began. Explosive breaching charges detonated, blowing ragged, smoking holes into the sides of the extraterrestrial ships. Into the cold, sterile corridors of the alien vessels poured the fury of Earth. Human soldiers, clad in heavy tactical gear, atmospheric masks, and magnetic boots, charged into the breaches. The internal gravity drives of the dreadnoughts had failed when the geomagnetic pulse hit, turning the battlefield into a disorienting, zero-gravity slaughterhouse. The Vel were entirely unprepared for this. They were a species that had evolved past physical labor millennia ago. They were tall, pale, fragile beings with elongated limbs and enlarged craniums, designed solely to interface with quantum keyboards and holographic matrices. They possessed no natural armor. They possessed no physical strength. The humans brought weapons that the Vel's logic engines considered archaic and utterly obsolete. Kinetic pump-action shotguns, heavy-caliber assault rifles, tungsten trench knives, tomahawks. The close-quarters combat was not a battle. It was a massacre. In the absolute silence of the vacuum-sealed corridors, the vibrations of human kinetic weapons shattered the crystalline tranquility of the alien ships. A single blast from a 12-gauge shotgun tore through the frail biological forms of the Vel like wet paper, sending horrific sprays of glowing blue blood floating into the zero-gravity air like suspended, macabre jewels. When the ammunition ran dry, the humans did not retreat. They drew their combat knives. They used their bare hands. The sheer, primal brutality of the human soldiers, the wild, heavy breathing, the furious roaring, the physical ferocity, overwhelmed the delicate extraterrestrial operators in seconds. On the command network, the Vel commanders watched in absolute, uncomprehending horror. Flesh and bone were not supposed to act this way. Biological organisms were supposed to calculate the odds of survival and surrender when faced with superior technological might. But these creatures from Earth were fighting like starving predators backed into a corner. In a state of pure panic, the alien commanders authorized the deployment of their ultimate subjugation tool, the psychic terror wave. It was a concentrated, telepathic frequency designed to bypass physical defenses and directly assault the amygdala of the enemy. On 900 other worlds, this wave had instantly paralyzed billions, inducing a state of catatonic fear so profound that the victims simply laid down and waited to be harvested. The invisible wave of psychic terror washed over the human soldiers battling inside the dreadnoughts. For a fraction of a second, the humans froze. A horrifying, cold dread gripped their minds. The alien frequency commanded their brains to shut down, to submit to the overwhelming terror of the void. But the Vel had made a fatal miscalculation. They had fundamentally misunderstood the violent, chaotic chemistry of Earth's biology. They did not understand the endocrine system. They did not understand adrenaline. When the human brain was hit with the maximum possible dose of artificial terror, it did not shut down. It perceived a mortal threat of apocalyptic proportions. And the human body responded the only way it knew how. It flooded the bloodstream with a massive, unprecedented surge of epinephrine. The psychic terror collided violently with pure, raw adrenaline. The chemical reaction in the human nervous system was catastrophic. It did not create fear. It created an explosive, neurochemical overload. The soldiers entered a state of physiological overclocking. Their pupils dilated until their eyes were nearly pitch black. Their heart rates skyrocketed past 200 beats per minute. The terror mutated instantly into a blinding, euphoric rage. Pain receptors shut off entirely. Muscle fibers contracted with enough force to snap their own bones. A human sergeant, previously pinned down by alien suppression fire, let out a guttural, blood-curdling scream. He tore off his cracked helmet, ignoring the toxic atmospheric mix leaking into the corridor. Driven by the chemically induced berserker rage, he launched himself off a bulkhead, flying through the zero-gravity space straight into a squad of alien defenders. He took 2 plasma bolts to the chest, the searing heat cauterizing his flesh. But the overclocked adrenaline masked the fatal trauma. He crashed into the alien line, driving a jagged piece of shrapnel into the commander's chest before finally expiring. A twisted, victorious grin frozen on his face. All across the fleet, the humans went entirely feral. They moved with a terrifying, unpredictable speed that defied the Vel's targeting algorithms. They fought with a manic, laughing euphoria. To the aliens, viewing the telemetry data, these were no longer biological specimens. They were illogical, unstoppable monsters powered by a chemical madness. High above the carnage, the remnants of the Vel's elite orbital fleet watched the slaughter of their tethered vanguard. The Supreme Architect, failing to re-establish order, made a desperate, cold calculation. To save the mission, the infected ships had to be purged. The elite fleet opened fire on their own kind. Massive orbital plasma batteries rained down heavy bombardment directly onto the tethered dreadnoughts, incinerating human and Vel alike. The Architect's logic was flawless. Faced with indiscriminate orbital bombardment and the certainty of death, the remaining human boarding parties would immediately evacuate and flee back to the surface to preserve their lives. But humanity had stopped playing by the rules of survival hours ago. As the tethered dreadnoughts began to break apart under the friendly fire, the human pilots and combat engineers inside did not run for the escape pods. Instead, bleeding, dying, and laughing through the neurochemical storm, they hacked into the alien helms. They ripped apart the smooth quantum consoles with their bare hands, physically splicing their own crude military tablets into the dreadnought's steering columns. "Flight Command, this is Vanguard Actual." A human pilot's voice crackled over the radio, completely drowned out by the sound of tearing metal and manic cheering from his squad mates. "We have secured the steering array. We are not leaving. I repeat, we are not leaving." Instead of fleeing the bombardment, the hacked, burning alien dreadnoughts suddenly fired their thrusters to maximum. The humans turned the massive, dying vessels into colossal kinetic shields. "Ramming speed!" the pilot screamed, his voice breaking into a wild, triumphant roar. Driven by suicidal defiance, the massive, burning wrecks of the tethered dreadnoughts tore themselves free from the Earth's magnetic cables, not to escape, but to launch themselves directly upward. The human pilots steered the gargantuan flaming hulks straight into the heart of the Vel's elite fleet. The sky became a canvas of blinding explosions as ship after ship was pulverized in catastrophic, head-on collisions. The airwaves were filled not with screams of terror, but with the roaring, triumphant cheers of madmen taking the gods down with them. The symphony of human defiance echoed across the dying sky, a beautiful, terrifying testament to a species that would rather burn the heavens than bow to them. The clock on the main tactical display marked exactly 28 minutes since the first shot was fired. 28 minutes. In less than half an hour, the invincible armada of the Vel had been reduced to a burning, chaotic graveyard in the upper atmosphere. The quantum supercomputers of the Supreme Architect were melting down, caught in infinite loops of contradictory data. The alien machines simply could not process a battlefield where the enemy considered their own death to be a highly effective tactical weapon. Suicide rams, chemically induced berserker charges, and the deliberate destruction of their own planetary core were completely absent from the Vel's predictive models. Order had dissolved into absolute madness. Desperate, cornered, and facing the unprecedented reality of a catastrophic defeat, the Supreme Architect abandoned all protocols of conquest. If the planet could not be harvested, it would be eradicated. From the massive orbital command station, hovering in the high exosphere, a terrifying new energy signature began to pool. Warning sirens in the human underground bunker changed from a frantic pulse to a long, sustained wail of absolute doom. The primary screens shifted to a blinding, toxic violet hue. Sir," a targeting officer shouted, his voice trembling for the first time. "We are reading a massive localized energy spike from their primary command station. It is not a standard plasma battery. The telemetry indicates it is a gravitational shear beam, the Omega Protocol. If that beam connects with the surface, it has enough concentrated force to cleave the Earth completely in half, from the North Pole to the South Pole." Dustin Brownlee stared at the rising energy bars on his monitor. The violet glow from the screen washed over his exhausted, bloody face. He knew the terrible truth. There was absolutely nothing on Earth that could intercept a beam of that magnitude. No amount of tectonic shifting, no salvaged alien dreadnoughts, and no nuclear arsenal could stop a planetary scalpel. It would cut through the Earth like warm butter. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The defiant cheers from earlier faded, replaced by the grim realization that they had finally run out of miracles. Dustin closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. His brain raced, discarding thousands of useless strategies. Then, he opened his eyes, and a terrifying clarity settled over him. "Redirect the remaining functional towers of the Zeus array," Dustin ordered, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. "Do not aim at the orbital command station. Turn the main planetary cannons 180 degrees away from the alien fleet. Target the moon." General Vance grabbed Dustin by the shoulder, spinning him around. "Are you out of your mind, Brownlee? The beam is charging right above us, and you want to shoot at the moon. Have you completely lost it?" Dustin did not flinch. He pointed a steady finger at the tactical display showing the alien targeting vectors. "Look at their firing solution," Dustin said, his words rapid and sharp. "The Vel do not aim manually. They do not have gunners. Every single weapon they possess is fired by their quantum predictive algorithms to fire a beam capable of cracking a planet. Their targeting matrix has to account for the exact gravitational pull of both the Earth and the Moon. They are relying on celestial constants. They believe the orbit of the Moon is a fixed, mathematical absolute. Vance stared at the screen, the realization slowly washing over his face. You want to change the math. I want to break their ruler, Dustin replied. Divert every single ounce of reserve power from the global grid into the Zeus array. I want a solid, hyper-dense kinetic mass fired directly into the lunar surface. We are not trying to destroy the moon. We just need to hit it hard enough to disrupt its orbital trajectory by exactly 1,000th of a millimeter for a few seconds. The command room exploded into motion. Technicians bypassed safety protocols, draining the last remaining civilian and military power grids across the globe. Entire continents went completely black to feed the massive planetary cannons. Energy reserves at maximum, the chief engineer yelled over the roar of the failing generators. Firing solution locked on the lunar surface. Fire, Dustin commanded. The Zeus array unleashed the most powerful kinetic slug ever generated by human hands. It bypassed the alien fleet entirely, tearing a silent, invisible path through the vacuum of space. It slammed into the gray, cratered surface of the moon with unimaginable force. The impact did not shatter the satellite, but the sheer kinetic transfer accomplished exactly what Dustin had calculated. The massive celestial body shuddered. Its orbital path shifted by an infinitesimal, microscopic fraction. It was a change so small that it would not affect the tides on Earth. But in the realm of quantum mathematics, it was the equivalent of tearing up the entire rulebook. High above the Earth, the Supreme Architect finalized the firing sequence for the Omega Protocol. Its targeting algorithms locked onto the precise gravitational barycenter of the Earth and the Moon. Then, the celestial constant changed. The gravitational variables shifted in real time. The equations driving the alien targeting computers instantly collapsed. For a machine race that relied on absolute, immutable perfection, a sudden, illogical change in the movement of a celestial body was an impossibility. In the most critical, life-or-death microsecond of the entire war, the supreme intelligence of the Vel suffered a total logic cascade. The master computer went completely, temporarily blind. The blinding violet energy of the Omega Protocol discharged from the high exosphere. It possessed the concentrated power to shatter continents and boil oceans. But the mathematical foundation of its targeting matrix was fundamentally flawed. Because of that microscopic shift in lunar gravity, the trajectory was thrown off by a fraction of a degree. Instead of striking the Earth's core, the apocalyptic beam grazed the outer edge of the atmosphere. It harmlessly illuminated the dark sky before continuing its path, slicing directly into the massive cluster of the Vel's own command fleet, hovering in high orbit. The impact was beyond catastrophic. A localized supernova erupted in the freezing vacuum of space, a blinding sphere of white-hot destruction that completely eclipsed the missing sun. The colossal orbital command station, the very brain of the alien invasion, was instantly vaporized. The Supreme Architect, the flawless quantum intelligence that had flawlessly conquered 900 worlds, was permanently erased from existence by its own ultimate weapon. For the surviving remnants of the Vel, observing the ashes of their invincible armada raining down upon the Earth, a new, entirely alien sensation flooded their biological processors. They had just witnessed their supreme leader self-destruct due to an illogical, suicidal manipulation of celestial physics by a supposedly primitive species. In that horrifying moment, the cold, calculating conquerors felt something they had never evolved to handle. It was absolute, paralyzing terror. Exactly 34 minutes after the invasion began, the heavy, agonizing psychic pressure returned to the minds of humanity. But it was no longer a demand for subjugation. It was a desperate plea. Across the globe, military monitors flickered to life. The audio channels crackled. A trembling, fragile voice, completely stripped of its former arrogance, broadcasted an unconditional surrender. They were begging for their lives. In the underground bunker, the heavy, suffocating silence was finally broken by the sharp scrape of a match. Dustin Brownlee lit a thick cigar, taking a slow, deep drag. He exhaled a cloud of gray smoke over the glowing command console. He picked up the heavy analog microphone. "We accept your surrender," Dustin said, his voice a low, gravelly growl that echoed through the bunker. "But, under our conditions, you will use your remaining vessels to dismantle the Aegis construct and clean our sky. You will repair every single ounce of atmospheric damage you caused. You will leave every piece of quantum technology you possess on our surface. And then, whatever is left of your pathetic fleet will be permanently expelled from this solar system. Do it immediately, or we will finish the job." 1 day later, the sun shone brightly over a scarred but victorious Earth. Dustin stood on the cracked surface of the command bunker's exterior, feeling the genuine warmth of the sun on his face. Above him, massive, sleek alien vessels moved obediently, hauling away the shattered metallic debris of their own cages under the strict, unforgiving targeting lock of human anti-aircraft batteries. Dustin watched them work in silence. The Vel had attempted to conquer a chaotic universe with cold, sterile logic, only to be utterly broken by the most beautiful, insane, and resilient manifestation of chaos in existence: humanity. Dustin turned back toward the global communication array, preparing one final broadcast. It was not aimed at the retreating alien fleet, but sent deep into the uncharted abyss of the galaxy. A permanent warning to whatever else was listening in the dark. "Do not bring mathematics to Earth," Dustin broadcasted into the eternal void. "Because here, we are the ones who rewrite the rules." Humanity had finally stepped out of its fragile shell, no longer looking at the stars as a potential prey, but stepping onto the cosmic stage as the ultimate apex predator. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for staying with us through this incredible journey. Where are you listening to this story from right now? We would love to know. If you enjoyed today's tale of humanity's triumph, please consider helping us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or using the PayPal link in the description or pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to pay our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families and empowering us to continue creating even better stories for you. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and see you in the next adventure.